Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of my card reviews for the Boomsday project. Today Blizzard did their live stream, so there's a lot of cards to get through. We've got 10 in total. So let's get started. Now of course the first card I wanted to look at today was the legendary hero card called Dr. Boom Mad Genius for Warrior class. Now this is a really exciting card. We all love hero cards. Some of my favourite cards that have ever been introduced into the game are hero cards. So I'm glad to see it come back. Unfortunately, it is the only one of the set. So just like Hagatha in the previous set, there will only be one hero card, and that is this, Dr. Boom. But that's okay because I think this card's pretty cool. It costs 7 mana, has 7 armor, so it's got 2 more armor than the previous hero power cards. But I think the idea of it was that they wanted it to be a 7 mana 7/7 like Dr. Boom was back in Goblins vs. Gnomes. But it also has a really interesting battle cry, and the battle cry is for the rest of the game your mechs have rush. Now, if you have a specific mech deck, that is really, really good because we've all seen how powerful rush can be because it can really help with your board presence. And the fact that all of them now have rush is great. Now, the problem here is that cards that have done this in the past, like Jaina giving your elementals lifesteal, it's a lot easier to make elementals. One, because your hero power could do it with Jaina, but two, it was easy to build your deck around elementals because it was kind of specific. But with mechs, it's unclear whether you can really fill your deck with mechs and make it powerful. Obviously this card really would knit it together, but because it's a legendary, you're only going to get it one copy of it in your deck, so you never know where it's going to be. You're not necessarily going to be able to play this on turn 7. You're going to have to wait in a lot of games. So it'll be interesting to see if we can make a strong enough deck surrounded around mechs to make this work, or whether this card on its own is just strong enough to go in a deck that doesn't have that many mechs but has a pretty solid deck surrounding it. So the other interesting thing about this card is that it has a random hero power. So there are 5 different hero powers that happen once you play Dr. Boom Mad Genius. This first one, Big Red Button, that just explains the hero power, so that doesn't actually do anything. But each turn you will get a random hero power from one of these 5. Now, you never get the same one twice in a row, and they don't happen in sequence. It is actually random. So the first one is called Micro Squad, summon 3 1/1 microbots. So they don't do anything. They are 1/1 mechs, but because of you played Dr. Boom, they do have rush. So that is pretty good. 2 mana 3 1/1s with rush can be really good. Zap Cannon does 3 damage. Again, 2 mana to do 3 damage is a very good hero power. Blast Shield, gain 7 armor, probably the weakest hero power, but can be situational and can be important. Kaboom, deal 1 damage to all enemies. Again, situational, but often can be really strong. And then the final one is Delivery Drone, discover a mech, which to me sounds like the most powerful spell, hero power here, because if you can discover a mech, and you get to pick from 3 and play it in the same turn, and it has rush, that is really, really good. It's kind of similar to what you can do with Rexar. Unfortunately, because it's random, you're not going to be getting that consistently. So, I mean, the other hero powers are still pretty good. So, I like this card. I think it's really, really cool. Just be interesting to see whether we can make enough mechs strong enough in a deck to work without Dr. Boom, because let's be honest, in Hearthstone you have to, if you're playing this legendary card, you're not always going to draw it. We've seen that with Jaina. You're not always going to get there in time to be able to control your opponent. So can the mechs be strong enough to last until you draw this? We will see. But outside of that, a very, very good card, very flavorful for the set, and one that I really, really like. So a pretty strong start there for Warrior, but let's move on to the next card for Priest, and this is a common card called Dead Ringer. It is also a mech. It costs 2 mana, has 2 attack and 1 health, and it has the Death Rattle of draw a Death Rattle minion from your deck. So any low cost card that has the effect of drawing a card is really strong. It's a really strong effect, drawing a card from your deck. This one does a specific draw. It targets Death Rattle minions, so again that could either be weaker or more powerful than just drawing a card. It depends on how you've built your deck and what Death Rattles you actually have in your deck. So immediately you look at this and think, well, For 2 mana, that's pretty good. It's not as good as a Cobbled Librarian, which we've seen in the Warlock class, which is insane. That was actually one of the best Warlock cards. For 1 mana, you get a 2/1 and you draw a card from your deck, and you also were able to upgrade your cards that needed you to deal damage to your hero. So I don't think it's as good as Cobbled Librarian, but it is a good card, a good little card that you could put in Quest Priest, for example, because 1, it's a death rattle itself, but 2, it can draw more death rattles to help you with that chain. It would work really well with cards like Obsidian Statue, although you don't want to turn that on. You don't want to draw that on turn 2. Potentially later on in the game, if you top deck this, you could then get your Obsidian Statue that helps you play it. Coffin Crasher is another kind of deck which didn't really work in the previous expansion, but if we get some support cards to work around it, then yes, this could work. So this card's pretty nice. I don't think it's insane. I don't think it's something that we'll see in lots of different decks, but in Death Rattle decks for sure, I think it does have a place. And it does synergize well with this next card, and this is a really interesting one. It's called Reckless Experimenter. It's another priest card. This time it's epic. It costs 5 mana, has 4 attack and 6 health, and it has this effect that we haven't seen in the game before, but Death Rattle minions you play cost 3 less, but they die at the end of the turn. So this is a really interesting mechanic. So basically it's encouraging you to summon minions and then have them die. And of course we know that with Death Rattles, that's sometimes quite important to kill them the same turn, because otherwise your opponent can silence them, they could Psychic Scream them, whatever it is, and you don't get the effect of that Death Rattle. So this is quite a nice way to be able to do that, and Death Rattle minions being able to cost 3 less means that you could play a few more minions than you usually would, and obviously if this survives 1 turn, that next turn if you've got 10 mana to play with, you can do some pretty insane turns. So things that come to mind are things like the Carnivorous Cube. So Carnivorous Cube now, when this is on the board, will cost 2 mana rather than 5. So you could play the cube and cube something really nice, but then at the end of the turn that cube dies and then summons 2 copies of the minion that you killed with the cube. So you don't necessarily get those bad effects. Reckless Experimenter doesn't die on its own, so it would stay there as well. It's just the Death Rattles minions that die at the end of the turn. So this feels like a really kind of cool experimental combo card that you could do some pretty insane turns with. Now this is the sort of card that I really like in Hearthstone because it helps you to build a deck around this card. It requires some setup because you need to get the Death Rattles in your hand, and you can create these crazy turns that are fun to play with. Potentially what I don't like about it so much is that it does put more emphasis on the Carnivorous Cube, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I've just kind of had my fill of that card because we all know how powerful it is. We've seen it in Warlock so much. We see it in Hadronox Druid and it's so powerful. We're even starting to see it in Hunter now where they play Egg Hunter. And the Carnivorous Cube just really is insane when you can get that to work with their play dead. So now we're going to potentially be seeing them in Priest, where they have these crazy turns where they just completely transform the game in 1 turn. And because it's an epic card, they can put 2 of these in their deck, so it's more consistent as well. I don't know, Carnivorous Cube is a card that I love playing, I just don't like playing against it, so I'm kind of stuck in the middle here, but we'll see. I think this is going to be a fun card for Priest to play, and we'll see how it progresses. So moving on now, we have a Warlock card, a Warlock spell, which is common. It costs 2 mana, and this is a interesting card, and a good one I think, because each player transforms a random minion in their hand into a demon. So this has got a lot of positives and it's got a lot of negatives. So it's one of these interesting tech cards, I would say, that people would potentially want to play if the meta goes in a certain direction. So if we were playing this today, what you would be targeting with this would be Shudderwock, for example. So when you play this, a minion in your opponent's hand gets transformed, and you can see which one has been transformed and also what it gets transformed into, and they can also see the same information from your side. So if you can put 2 of these in your deck and your opponent hasn't played their Hadronox yet and they've got kind of 4, 5, 6 cards in their hand, and you play 2 of these, you've probably got a good chance of hitting Hadronox or their Shudderwock. So it's quite nice. The problem with it is that it does transform one of your minions. So if you've got a specific minion in your hand you want to keep, you might not necessarily want to play this. However, that demon will probably synergize better with your deck than it will your opponent's. The other issue is you could randomly transfer a terrible minion in their deck into a Void Lord, for example. So it's very risky, but if you're playing against a Shadowwalk Shaman or Malagos Druid, we've seen Hadronox Druid, and you're able to get this off and just ruin one of their cubes, or you ruin one of those key cards that I mentioned, then that's the point of the card. That can be very good. Will this see play though? Because Warlock's got a lot of strong cards, and which 2 cards do you want to drop to put this in? I mean, it's a 2-drop spell. Do you want to drop a Defile from your deck? Not so sure. But I like it. It's kind of like Dirty Rat, which was a combo disrupting card, but this is a specifically for Warlock, so you can't play it in other classes. Next up, we've got a common neutral card called Faithful Lumi. It costs 1 mana, has 1 attack, 1 health, is a mech, and it has the battle cry of give a friendly mech +1/+1. So effectively, if you've got a mech on the board, this is a 1 mana 2/2. So those stats for a 1 mana card is very good, but usually this card kind of would go in a zoo deck where you're just trying to get some value from your low cost minions, and the fact that it needs to have a mech to go onto kind of makes it a lot weaker in my opinion. If it's give a friendly minion +1/+1, then that's great and it would work, but I don't really see any kind of zoo mech deck coming out at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll release a lot more mechs which can lend that to it, but it doesn't really seem like something you would want. If you held it in your opening hand, you'd have to ensure that you've got another mech, and if you don't have a mech, you might end up playing this as a 1 mana 1/1, which is terrible. It does have some synergies with the upgradable frame bot, which is the 2 mana 5/1. So if you played that on turn 2, then on turn 3 you can upgrade it to a 6/2 with this card, which is pretty nice, but ultimately not really that great. I think specifically the mech tag and also making it give a mech +1/+1 will probably make it not very playable, but we'll see. Alright, so next up we've got another legendary spell. This time it's for Paladin. Costs 7 mana. It's called Kangas Endless Army. And this can have potentially very good uses. Resurrect 3 friendly mechs, and those mechs keep any magnetic upgrades. So this is basically the card that kind of knits together the mech paladin. I don't think we've seen enough mechs to make it worthwhile yet, but as the expansion goes on we'll probably see more. So I think the idea here is you're going to be wanting to play a bunch of mechs, fuse them together with the magnetic ability, and then resurrect them on turn 7 to get 3 kind of huge mechs back. The issue here is though that 1 Psychic Scream, if you play this on turn 7 against a priest and they can Psychic Scream it, Twisting Nether would also destroy everything, but I suppose that's not really a bad thing. It's only 2 cards in the game, but the problem is that you're resurrecting 3 friendly mechs. So if you say decided you wanted to build a deck with loads of mechs in it, then you may end up just resurrecting the weaker mechs that you've played earlier on in the game and not the big powerful mechs that have been fused together. So I think the trick with this is to specifically play certain mechs, combine them together to make 3 specific ones that you want to resurrect. Now we haven't seen the whole set yet, so this really hinges on whether there will actually be any worthwhile mechs to put in that you could fuse. I think from what we've seen in the game so far, yes, there are some good cards, but not enough really in my opinion to be able to make a deck that's worthwhile playing this card in. It's a legendary spell as well, so you can only play it once. So effectively this is a N'Zoth, which instead of filling your board with death rattles, it actually only summons 3 random mechs. So can be good, can be bad, but if you've managed to put a lot of pressure on it, and you get lucky or specifically plan for the exact mechs, then yes, it's a very powerful turn 7 play. So I'm interested to try this, but I really hope it doesn't turn out like the Paladin Quest Kaleidosaur, where yes, summoning Galvadon was great, but it was very easy for your opponent to remove, and if they had the specific removal. So we'll see. Interesting card. I quite like these legendary spells. The problem with them though is just the downside of only having 1 in your deck, I think might make them a bit of a struggle. So moving on now, we've got a pretty interesting rogue card here. It's a 2 mana 3/2. It's called Lab Recruiter, and it is common, and the battle cry is shuffle 3 copies of a friendly minion into your deck. So there was a spell a rogue spell in the game called Gang Up, and you could target any minion on the board and shuffle 3 copies of it into your deck. So this is effectively that attached to a minion, which is quite nice. For only 2 mana, that's a pretty strong effect. The issue is that will you want to play this if you've got a minion on the board that you don't want to shuffle into your deck? So shuffling 3 1-drops into your deck is not a good thing to do. So this has to be very specifically built around your deck and something that you want to do. So for example, Faldori Strider is a nice card that you'd want to do. So if you play on turn 4 the Faldori Strider, you shuffle 3 spiders into your deck. Now when you play this Lab Recruiter on the Faldori Strider, it doesn't remove the Faldori Strider, it just shuffles 3 copies of it in the deck, and then you can play 3 more Faldori Striders later on in the game. So you can potentially get loads and loads of spiders. The example they used on the stream was it could be used potentially with the Rogue Legendary spell Unstable Element, which draws the rest of your deck. So when you draw the rest of your deck, potentially you've got no cards left, you can play this and put some more cards back into your deck. So it has some uses. I think it's going to be very specific, but it's a sort of specific card which can be quite fun to try and build a deck around. I can see kind of like an archetype where we're using Gadgetzan Auctioneer to draw a bunch of cards, then you're playing your Lab Recruiter to shuffle a bunch back in, you're putting loads of spiders in, kind of like a Miracle Rogue kind of enabler. But you do have to be very specific about the 3 copies of minions that you shuffle back in, because there's no point shuffling bad minions back in there. Moving on again, we've got the Omega Agent. So this is another Omega card that we talked about before, and what that does, the Omega effect, is it has a different impact when you play it on turn 10 or beyond than if you play it before turn 10. So this one is 5 mana, 4 attack, 5 health. So if you were to play this on turn 5, pretty average. But the battle cry, if you have 10 mana crystals, summon 2 copies of this minion. So that's pretty decent. That is pretty decent. If after turn 10 you can play this, what it means is it's a doppelgangster. So play this for 5 mana, you get 3, 4, 5s, and that is pretty insane value. Really, really insane value. And there isn't too much of a downside, because if you're desperate to play this against a specific aggro deck, then you could play it for 5 mana, 4, 5. But if you're waiting and you've got a plan, 10 mana crystals, you can play this 5 mana and summon 2 more copies of it. It also works the same as Doppelgangster. If these are buffed, then they will gain that buff when you play it, so because it's summoning copies of this minion. Now I don't think there's any Warlock cards in the game which would actually work or synergize with this. That's more of a Paladin thing, but maybe we'll see some cards introduced to work with that. But very good card. I think if Omega Agent becomes a thing, or Omega cards become a thing, this is a very good one. Much better than the Omega card that we saw before. Moving on now to a very interesting mage spell, and one we haven't seen in the game before. It's called Unexpected Results. It's epic. It costs 4 mana, and it summons 2 random 2-cost minions improved by spell damage. Now that's a little bit confusing, but what it means is that the cost of the minions that you summon is improved by spell damage. So you'll always summon 2 random minions, but if you have spell damage +1, they will become 3-cost minions. If you have spell damage +2, they will become 4-cost minions. If you have Malagos on the board with +5 spell damage, then you will summon 2 random 7-cost minions. Now, the problem with this is there aren't many spell damage minions in the game that you're going to want to really play. Black Cat is quite a good spell damage minion, but to play it is a 3 mana card, 3 mana 3/3 with spell damage +1, and Battlecry draw a card if it's in an odd. If you're playing an odd deck, well, this is an even card, so you couldn't get that effect from your Black Cat. So I don't know. Maybe there'd be some more cards to synergize with this that are introduced. And let's say you do have Malagos on the board. Is it that great really to summon 2 random 7 minions? Yes, it is very good for 4 mana, but do you really want to compromise your deck to set up that combo? I'm not so sure. I'll probably be proven wrong. Somebody will be able to get a really cool combo deck out of this. But at the moment, it seems like a very strange kind of deck, especially for the mage archetype. It seems more like a like resurrecting minions onto the board and summoning minions is more of a kind of priest thing to do, I would suggest, but we'll see. I think it's an interesting one. I think Mage is a class that can definitely kind of use some expansion, because at the moment it seems to be just Elemental Mage, which isn't quite powerful enough. A really fun deck that I love to play, but not quite powerful enough, or just Burn Mage, really. So it'd be nice to see some archetypes within that can potentially work. So finally for today, we've got an epic neutral minion, which is 4 mana, 4 attack, 3 health. It's called Weaponized Pinata, so some pretty cool card art here. It's also a mech, and it has the death rattle of add a random legendary minion to your hand. Now, this card I don't think is very good, in my opinion. I think for 4 mana, the 4/3 stats are too weak. The 3 health is quite easy for your opponent to kill at that stage in the game. Also, the death rattle, add a random legendary minion to your hand. Although this mechanic is really fun, it's great to get these random legendaries. There are too many downsides. Too many legendaries that you don't want, don't synergize with your deck, or are just bad cards. Sometimes you can high roll and get something really, really good, but I don't think it's really something that you would want to put in your deck. I'm not sure really why this card is in the game. It's an interesting one that maybe there'll be some kind of death rattle mech archetype which you could play. So if you're summoning more copies of this later in the game, then that's great, because you can generate extra value from these random legendaries that you're getting to maybe make the game or increase your power later in the game. But on its own, just playing this on turn 4, I don't think it's that great. Maybe I'll get proven wrong, but I can't see it. Okay guys, that's all the cards I got to review for today. Some pretty interesting ones. I'm really getting hyped up for the expansion now. So I will be back tomorrow with another video when some more cards are released. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.